Nia Serrano didn't discover the deference dividend protocol in a lab or a lightning storm. She found it on a Tuesday morning in a payroll app that blinked like it was embarrassed. She had just started as a junior analyst at Orchid Metrics, a boutique consulting firm perched above Vanta City's harbor skyline, where money moved faster than weather. Her onboarding packet said things like synergy and discretion. Her manager said things like skirts shorter than policy are distractions, and distractions are unprofessional. The remark was aimed at Nia's knees, even though she wore her plainest slacks. Nia did what she'd practiced through school and job interviews. She apologized, lowered her gaze, and made herself smaller. The manager's satisfaction sharpened the air. Then Nia's phone vibrated and her balance rose as if fear had been an invoice paid in full. The app pinged. Transfer complete. 1,000 credits for looking scared. Then it pinged again with a tooltip Nia Serrano could have sworn wasn't there before. Deference dividend. In environments of hostility, de-escalation is compensated. Higher submission yields higher payout. It sounded like satire. It also sounded like a trap. Nia Serrano glanced around the open-plan office white desks, glass walls, the kind of silence that wasn't calm but controlled. She tested it with a low-stakes experiment. When a coworker complained she had taken the last clean mug, Nia Serrano whispered, "Sorry," and offered her own. Another transfer landed, smaller this time, like a polite tip. The pattern was real. The question was why. At lunch, Nia Serrano sat alone by the window with a cheap instant coffee sachet labeled MIDN Diet, dissolved into bitter foam, and tried to reason it out. An algorithm that rewarded cowardice made no moral sense, which meant it probably made financial sense. She opened the protocol page inside the app and found it had no company logo, only a small icon, a paper crane. That night she rode the metro home, turning a mint green metro token with a chipped edge between her fingers, and noticed a stranger across the aisle doing the same. The stranger met her gaze, lifted his token in a small salute, and looked away. Nia Serrano felt the odd comfort of recognition, like spotting another survivor in a crowd. Over the next week, the protocol behaved like a mischievous accountant. Every time someone tried to shame her, intimidate her, or push her into a corner, the payout grew. When a senior analyst snapped at her for a formatting error she hadn't made, Nia Serrano bowed her head, apologized, offered to redo everything, and watched her balance jump. When office gossip implied she had been hired for looks instead of skill, Nia Serrano swallowed her pride, pretended to be wounded, and received enough credits to pay her mother's electric bill for 3 months. When the manager tried to mentor her by dragging her into a conference room and raising his voice until her hands shook, the protocol paid out so much her phone heated in her palm. Hostility, it seemed, was the input. Submission was the proof of work. She built a spreadsheet. Incident, perpetrator, timestamp, location, payout. A pattern emerged. Not every insult triggered the protocol. Only targeted hostility pressure applied with intent produced dividends. The worse the intent, the larger the transfer. On Thursday, Director Huang, the firm's compliance director, with a voice like laminated paperwork, called Nia Serrano into a glass room and suggested, very casually, that she should be grateful. The firm tolerated her. Nia Serrano apologized until her throat hurt, and the protocol paid her enough credits to cover a year of tuition for her cousin. Director Huang smiled like he'd watered a plant. As she left, Nia Serrano noticed a paper crane icon flicker on the room's wall display, then vanish. The next clue arrived as a DM from an unknown account named Paper Crane, 17. You're not the only one. Meet at Platform 9, 9:17 p.m. Bring nothing that listens. Nia Serrano almost deleted it, then noticed the timestamp inside the message matched her payout log, down to the second. At 9:17 p.m., she stood on Platform 9 with her hands in her pockets, and her heart trying to climb out of her throat. The stranger from the metro stepped out of the crowd. He was tall, unflashy, the kind of person you couldn't describe to police because he looked like everyone and no one. "I'm Kellen Rao," he said. "And you're trending," Kellen Rao explained quickly, like someone used to being interrupted by danger. The deference dividend protocol wasn't mystical. It was proprietary behavioral tech, originally designed to compensate vulnerable workers in high-risk environments, nurses, public defenders, social workers whose emotional labor had been exploited for centuries. A civic coalition built a pilot, funded by anonymous donors. Then someone stole the code, inverted its ethics, and embedded it into corporate ecosystems. Now, the protocol didn't just compensate de-escalation, it profited from intimidation. It mapped who could be controlled and who would break, and it turned that map into money. Orchid Metrics is one of the hubs, Kellen Rao said. We think someone inside is routing the extracted pool to a private wallet. We need proof. Kellen Rao introduced Nia Serrano to Suri Vale, a soft-spoken engineer who carried a backpack full of adapters and looked like she hadn't slept since the last decade. In a cafe booth shadowed by hanging plants, Suri Vale slid a small device across the table, a pocket recorder shaped like a lipstick tube. It's a recorder, she said, but it's not for sound. It logs the protocol's hidden metadata hashes, routing, signatures. If you wear the right interface, we can trace the payouts to the controlling wallet. Nia Serrano stared. Why me? Suri Vale shrugged. Because you're good at surviving, and because you're already generating the kind of hostility events the protocol loves. You're a signal. The buyer behind the hijack had a friendly name in the shadows, Orchid Foundation, a philanthropic shell that sponsored public innovation while quietly purchasing control over behavioral systems. Their board included people who didn't like regulation and did like leverage. If the deference dividend protocol could reward fear, it could also map weakness. And if it could map weakness, it could be used to break unions, silence whistleblowers, and steer politics with nothing more than targeted intimidation. Nia Serrano imagined an invisible meter inside every workplace, counting bruises no one could photograph. Her stomach turned. Nia Serrano agreed to help on one condition. Her mother, a bus mechanic with arthritic hands, would never be touched by this. Kellen Rao nodded. Nia Serrano, then you stay small at Orchid Metrics, he said. Keep earning. Keep logging. Don't let them realize you're watching. So Nia Serrano returned to work and became the best coward in the building. She apologized for things she didn't do. She flinched on cue. She let rumors land on her like ash and pretended it burned. Each time, her balance rose. Each time, her spreadsheet thickened into a ledger of cruelty. She started hiring help, but not in the way Orchid Metrics expected. When a manager dumped an impossible proposal on her desk at 6:04 p.m. and threatened termination if it wasn't done by morning, Nia Serrano bowed her head, whispered that she deserved to be fired, and walked out. At home, she posted a gig to a clandestine forum. Need a logistics deck by 7 a.m. Pay high. NDA optional. Bring skill. Within minutes, she had 100 replies. All hungry, all talented, all tired of being paid pennies. Nia Serrano paid fairly, anonymized sources, and stitched together the best work into a coherent plan. By sunrise, the deck was brilliant. She delivered it with trembling hands. The manager took credit. Nia Serrano smiled, let her eyes go wet, and watched the protocol pay her again. She was laundering malice into mutual aid. The trapdoor opened when Director Huang invited her to an after-hours meeting in the top-floor conference suite, the one with the city glowing beneath the glass like a captive galaxy. Nia Serrano arrived with her fear rehearsed. Director Huang didn't bother with small talk. We've noticed you attract chaos, he said. People who interact with you end up disciplined, demoted, or inconvenienced. That's an interesting side effect. He slid a velvet case across the table and opened it. Inside was a glassy black cuff that reads micro-expressions. Wear this. It will help us measure your performance. It will help you earn more. His smile said he believed he was offering a gift. His eyes said he was fitting a collar. Nia Serrano slipped the cuff on and felt it wake against her skin like a cold heartbeat. The recorder in her pocket hummed. Suri Vale would be watching the metadata feed remotely. Nia Serrano asked the question that looked naive, but was sharpened to a point. Why do you trust me? Director Huang leaned forward. Because you're submissive, he said, matter of fact. Submission is predictable. Predictability is the only thing you can build a system on. The words landed like a handprint on glass. Nia Serrano nodded as if grateful, while her stomach curled into a fist. On her walk home, the city's neon made everything look like a false promise. Her phone pinged. Paper Crane, 17. Do not go to transit. They'll use you as bait. Then another message from a different account. Quill, Air, if you want out, I can open a door. Nia Serrano stopped under a street lamp, heart thudding. Arden Quill, she recognized the name from investigative podcasts. A journalist known for dismantling corporate narratives with patient receipts. She had never contacted him. She typed back, You don't know me. The reply came instantly. I know the symbol. I know the protocol. I know they always start by paying you to be quiet. They met in a crowded night market, where everyone's voices overlapped into cover. Arden Quill was younger than Nia Serrano expected, with tired eyes and hands stained by ink, like he still took notes on paper out of stubborn principle. He didn't flirt. He didn't flatter. He simply looked at the cuff on her wrist and said, "That device authenticates them to the root server. If we clone it, we can trace the extracted pool to the controlling wallet. We can prove intimidation is being monetized. And we can force regulators to treat this as fraud, not vibes." Nia Serrano swallowed. "And if they come after my mother?" Arden Quill answered. "Then we move her before you even ask." In Surrey Vale's basement workshop, the cuff lay open like a shell. Inside, a tiny shard of silicon was engraved with a crane. "Director Huang didn't just steal code," Surrey Vale murmured. "He stole the symbol. That's arrogance. Arrogance leaves fingerprints." She built a clone in 6 hours, a perfect twin that would report to the team, while the original stayed on Nia Serrano's wrist. Then she handed Nia Serrano a folded paper crane with a QR code inside, and told her to keep it in her wallet. "If you ever get cornered and you can't speak, show this," she said. "It will tell the right people where you are." The transit authority meeting was held under surveillance domes in a room that smelled like disinfectant and power. Nia Serrano sat beside Director Huang and smiled like someone grateful to exist. Across the table, union reps looked exhausted. Executives looked smooth. A proposal was presented. Behavioral compliance incentives for drivers, stress reduction protocols for dispatchers, anonymized sentiment tracking for riders. Nia Serrano recognized the language instantly. It was the deference dividend protocol in a suit. When a union rep objected quietly, carefully, Director Huang turned his gaze on him and the air tightened. The rep's hands trembled. The protocol's meter in Nia Serrano's pocket spiked. A transfer landed. Nia Serrano felt sick. Then she did the one thing that didn't pay. She spoke. "What protections exist against coercion?" she asked, voice steady. The room froze. Director Huang stared as if she had slapped him. Her phone didn't buzz. No dividend. The silence was a new kind of money. Expensive, dangerous. Director Huang recovered and smiled thinly. "Thank you, Assistant Serrano," he said, using her last name like a leash. "We'll discuss your concerns privately." Nia Serrano nodded meekly, returning to her role, and the protocol began paying again as if relieved. Courage, she realized, was not the protocol's product. It was the protocol's exit. That private discussion happened in the suite. Director Huang set a tablet on the table showing a dashboard of payouts, anonymized users, heat maps of hostility events across the city. It was bigger than Orchid metrics. It was a network. "You embarrassed me," he said. "I should fire you. But you're useful. You're a sponge for other people's malice. You convert it into data. You convert it into cash. Sign this and we'll take care of you." He slid documents forward. Non-disclosure, non-disparagement, biometric consent. The clauses were written like handcuffs. Nia Serrano nodded, tears blooming on cue, and signed with shaking hands. Surrey Vale captured every signature hash from the cuff clone. Arden Quill watched through a remote feed and whispered, "Got you." Afterward, security tried to stop her in the lobby, claiming she had forgotten to log out of a terminal. Nia Serrano apologized, asked permission to breathe, made herself small. Their hostility spiked. The protocol extracted from their intent and paid her like a tax refund. Behind her eyes, she pressed the paper crane's QR code and triggered a wipe of her local app history, preserving everything in Surrey Vale's encrypted vault. She walked out into night rain with her heart beating like it was learning a new rhythm. The next 48 hours moved fast, like panic with a plan. Arden Quill wrote an exposé with context and receipts, careful not to sensationalize. Surrey Vale prepared a technical report that traced the hijack from the original Civic pilot to the corporate network. Kellen Rao contacted regulators and worker advocates, offering evidence under whistleblower protections. They timed the release for maximum impact. A Friday morning when markets were fragile and attention was hungry, Nia Serrano sat in the workshop and watched her old self on a muted office security clip, head bowed, shoulders rounded, and felt grief like a bruise. She had survived by shrinking. Now she had to survive by standing. When the story broke, it didn't explode like a bomb. It spread like dye in water, blooming through news feeds, union channels, investor chats. Orchid Foundation issued a statement about misinterpretation. Orchid Metrics announced an internal review. Director Huang vanished from office hours and appeared in legal filings. The transit authority froze the contract. A senator demanded hearings. The public learned something it had suspected but never seen named. Intimidation could be quantified, traded, and weaponized at scale. And once you can quantify something, you can prosecute it. Retaliation arrived anyway. A man visited her mother at the bus depot with a smile too polite. "We just want to make sure your daughter is safe," he said. Her mother called Nia Serrano afterward. Voice steady but thin. Nia Serrano felt the world tilt. Kellen Rao didn't hesitate. "We move her tonight," he said. "No arguments." Nia Serrano wanted to refuse, to not be a burden, to keep her family invisible. Then she remembered how invisibility had been sold to her as safety. She agreed. They relocated her mother, installed cameras, changed routines, and built a quiet perimeter the way you build a fence around a garden, not because the garden is weak, but because it deserves protection. A month later, hearings began. Arden Quill testified with calm rage. Suri Vale presented graphs and logs that made senators blink. Nia Serrano, subpoenaed, sat under fluorescent lights and told the story in plain language. How she had been rewarded for flinching, how cruelty had become currency, how Director Huang had threatened her future in exchange for silence. She didn't dramatize. She didn't perform fear. She simply told the truth. On the record, the deference dividend protocol offered her nothing. It was almost a relief. The protocol could not pay for courage because courage was the only thing it couldn't monetize. Director Huang tried to blame rogue contractors. He tried to paint Nia Serrano as unstable, attention-seeking, greedy. It might have worked if the metadata hadn't existed, if the cuff clone hadn't captured the wallet signature, if the paper crane server hadn't preserved the chain. Evidence is a language bullies can't speak fluently. The committee referred the case for criminal investigation. Orchid Foundation's board members resigned one by one. Markets punished them, and for once the punishment wasn't extracted from someone's fear. It was extracted from someone's balance sheet. With settlement funds and recovered assets, the Civic Coalition rebuilt the original pilot in a new form. A public de-escalation dividend for frontline workers, open source audited, with strict protections against capture. Nia Serrano refused offers from 3 tech giants and instead joined the coalition as operations lead. Her salary was smaller than her old dividends, but it came without the taste of someone else's malice. She moved her mother into a sunlit apartment near the harbor and bought her tools that didn't hurt her hands. She began measuring wealth by how little fear a day contained. Arden Quill stayed nearby, not as a savior but as a witness who understood that care is an action, not a line. They didn't rush into romance as if it were a reward. They built trust like a long bridge, plank by plank. On nights when Nia Serrano's hands shook, Arden Quill brewed terrible coffee and sat beside her without asking for comfort in return. On mornings when the world felt heavy, Nia Serrano sent him a paper crane emoji, and he sent back one word, "Here." The word mattered more than any transfer. 2 years later, a young intern approached Nia Serrano with anxious eyes. "I got the ping," the intern whispered. "It paid me when my supervisor yelled." Nia Serrano felt the old chill, then the old clarity. She took the intern's hands and said, "Good, it means the bridge is holding. But listen, don't stay where you have to buy air." She helped the intern file a report, move teams, set boundaries, and when the intern apologized for crying, Nia Serrano smiled and said, "Don't apologize for your nervous system. Just don't let them rent it." One evening, Nia Serrano walked past Orchid Metrics' former building, now rebranded under a different name, as if paint could erase behavior. Her phone buzzed once. Not a dividend. A message from Paper Crane. 17. New cluster spotted. Different city. Same symbol. Ready? Nia Serrano looked up at the skyline and exhaled. She wasn't the best coward anymore. She was something more expensive. "Yes," she typed. "Send coordinates." She tucked a cheap instant coffee sachet labeled Midnight into her pocket, felt its papery scratch, and stepped into the night as if it owed her nothing, and she owed it the truth. In the weeks before the exposure, Nia learned how to weaponize politeness without letting it weaponize her, how to look harmless while building a dossier, how to turn every "Are you okay?" into a timestamp, and every forced smile into a line of data. Kellen taught her to treat retaliation like weather. You don't argue with rain, you carry an umbrella. You keep the forecast on your screen, and you relocate when the storm has a name and a schedule. Suri taught her that systems rot at their edges, where standards are vague and accountability is negotiable. Those edges are where you insert the lever and apply steady pressure until the facade shifts. Arden taught her that shame is a private prison designed by people who profit when you stay silent. Once you speak, the prison door doesn't vanish. but it stops being locked from the outside. Nia funded microgrants for workers who needed emergency rent after reporting abuse. Because she knew retaliation rarely arrived as a fist. It arrived as an overdue notice and a threat to your mother's medication. She funded a hotline staffed by retired paralegals who could translate corporate intimidation into plain options, because clarity is the opposite of fear, and fear was the commodity they were selling. When critics accused her of profiting from her own victimhood, she answered with math. The extracted pool came from documented malice, and every credit she spent was redirected toward safety nets corporations refused to build. When trolls tried to bait her online, she stopped replying. She refused to let strangers monetize her attention, the way executives had monetized her flinch. In therapy, she named the comfort she hadn't expected. The certainty of victimhood, because victimhood had rules and payouts. Autonomy felt riskier, because it came without guaranteed compensation. Over time, she measured progress, not by transfers but by quiet days, when no one had to apologize for existing, when a workplace could be boring, and that boredom meant safety. The coalition used the hearings as a lever, not a finale. Kellen warned Nia that committees love theater and hate maintenance, so they built maintenance into the outcome. Procurement rules, audit requirements, and a public registry where any agency using behavioral tech had to disclose vendor, model, purpose, training categories, and appeal pathways. Regulators called it burdensome. Workers called it oxygen. The first time an agency tried to sneak a sentiment tracker into a contract addendum, the registry caught it because a clerk in procurement actually read the checkbox list and recognized the paper crane icon in a vendor PDF. The clerk emailed Nia anonymously. "Is this you?" Nia replied with a single line. "If you see the crane, ask for the logs." Orchid Metrics attempted to survive by scapegoating director Huang as a lone bad actor. The narrative was almost believable until Suri's technical report showed the routing wallet was not one man's vanity account, but a layered structure with periodic sweeps into a foundation-managed pool. Money moved like tides, not like impulse. Arden published that part without flourish. He wrote, in plain language, that intimidation had been priced, pooled, and redistributed upward. That sentence, more than any metaphor, enraged the board members. Rage is a form of confession when it appears on paper. The criminal investigation moved slower than headlines. Nia learned to treat slowness as terrain rather than injustice. Prosecutors requested device firmware. Judges argued about warrants. Defense attorneys tried to exclude metadata as speculative. Suri sat through depositions and explained hash chains like she was teaching stubborn teenagers. Nia sat beside her, wrists bare now, and kept her posture neutral, because she had learned that some men interpret visible anger as instability. She let them underestimate her again. But this time she did it consciously, the way you choose camouflage, not the way you accept erasure. When the defense claimed the protocol couldn't be tied to real-world harm because it only paid money, Nia brought a folder of affidavits from workers, nurses written up after refusing unsafe shifts, drivers disciplined after objecting to impossible schedules, interns threatened with scholarship penalties for reporting harassment. The protocol hadn't bruised anyone directly. It had funded the ecosystem that did. The judge read the affidavits quietly and then ordered additional discovery. No gavel slam, just a door opening another inch. Suri built a simulator for the court, an interactive replay that took a workplace incident and displayed the hidden protocol metadata alongside it. Intent classification, hostility score, extraction amount, routing signature. It made the invisible legible. When the court clerk ran the simulator and watched a small insult bloom into a transfer to the control wallet, she whispered, "So it's like a tax on cruelty." Nia answered, "And a subsidy for predators." The clerk looked nauseated, and Nia understood that nausea as a kind of civic awakening. The public registry quickly filled with entries, and patterns emerged. The protocol appeared in places nobody expected. A university scholarship platform that rewarded respectful tone in complaint forms. A gig economy app that paid bonuses when drivers didn't challenge late payment disputes. A customer service system that increased tips when agents accepted verbal abuse without escalation. Nia realized the hijack had been bigger than Orchid. Orchid had merely been bold enough to centralize it. One night, paper crane, 17-cent coordinates for the new cluster, and added a note. Different city. Same extraction, wallet family. They learned to rebrand. Nia traveled with Kellen and Suri, not as vigilantes but as auditors with legal cover. They met a community organizer in a basement union hall who described a pattern of quiet punishments after workers spoke up. The organizer slid a crumpled receipt across the table. On the receipt, hidden as a decorative flourish, was a tiny crane watermark. Nia felt the old chill. Symbols, she understood, are not just decoration. They are an address. They built a playbook from that trip. A practical guide that started with one directive: do not try to be brave alone. It explained how to preserve evidence, how to document hostile interactions without escalating danger, how to separate personal devices from workplace apps, how to request logs under existing labor laws, how to find counsel before signing performance improvement agreements. It included scripts for workers who wanted to refuse biometric wearables without triggering retaliation. The guide was not inspiring. It was survivable. As the playbook spread, the coalition received messages from people who sounded like Nia had sounded at Platform 9. Scared, specific, tired. Nia answered each message the same way. First, she asked what the person needed to be safe today. Then she asked what evidence they could preserve without endangering themselves. Then she offered options, not heroism. She had learned that when your nervous system is already on fire, heroism feels like another demand. Arden struggled with a different danger, being turned into a brand. Networks invited him to debate executives on camera. Executives wanted to call it a misunderstanding and move on. Arden refused most invitations. He told Nia he was afraid of becoming a mouth that corporations used as proof they were listening. Nia said, "Then only speak when you can attach receipts." Arden smiled and said, "You've turned journalism into engineering." Nia replied, "And you've turned engineering into accountability." The case against Director Huang ended, not with a cinematic confession, but with a plea deal that required him to name other participants and surrender access keys. He tried to protect the board by offering partial names. Prosecutors threatened trial. He yielded. Names appeared in filings, and the foundation's philanthropic mask cracked. Some board members escaped prison through settlements and resignations, but they lost the only thing they valued more than money: invisibility. The coalition used recovered funds to create a deference dividend firewall, a verified, audited version of the protocol that could not route to private wallets, could not run without public oversight, and could not be installed in any workplace without explicit worker consent and an independent appeal path. Instead of paying people to accept abuse, it paid organizations to reduce hostility events by changing policy, staffing levels, complaint response times, harassment enforcement. Nia insisted on that shift. "If you pay the victim, you risk making pain profitable," she told the board. "If you pay the institution to remove the hazard, you make safety the incentive." Her mother, now in the sunlit harbor apartment, began to heal in ways Nia hadn't expected. One morning, her mother asked, cautiously, if Nia wanted to go to the marina market with her. It was a normal question, but normality had been impossible for months. Nia went. They walked among fish stalls and fruit carts while tourists laughed nearby, unaware of the infrastructure of fear beneath most cities. Her mother bought a pastry and said, "You used to apologize for breathing." Nia swallowed. "I know," she said. Her mother nodded once, like a mechanic checking an engine, and said, "Now you're building something that makes it harder for them to charge rent on breath." The last time Nia wore the cuff was during a controlled audit test. Suri asked her to put it on and reenact a hostility event so they could verify the firewall prevented private extraction. Nia complied, played small, received the system's diagnostic ping, and watched the output route to the public oversight account with full transparency. No secret wallet, no hidden sweep. Suri exhaled like she'd been holding air for years. Nia removed the cuff and placed it in a sealed evidence box, then wrote the date on the label in black ink. She wanted a future investigator to know exactly when the system stopped being allowed to hide. On the day the public registry hit 10,000 entries, Kellen hosted a quiet meeting in a borrowed conference room. There were no cameras, no slogans, just workers, advocates, and a few tired regulators who had finally accepted that innovation without audit is just experimentation on the powerless. Kellen asked Nia to say something. Nia stood, looked at the faces, and kept it short. "Let them underestimate you if it keeps you safe, but don't let them own the story. Own the logs, own the chain. Systems break when the invisible becomes checkable." People nodded. Someone folded a paper crane from a napkin and left it on the table like a signature. That night, Nia walked along the harbor where Orchid Metrics once sat above the skyline, its windows gleaming like it had never harmed anyone. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady. Her phone vibrated once with a message from a new account, Crane. south containing only a photo of a badge screen with the tiny crane icon and a caption, "First day. Already paid me for flinching." Nia typed back, "Good." Screenshot the receipt. "Don't confront. We'll build your exit step by step." Then she tucked her phone away and looked at the water until her heartbeat slowed. Winning, she thought, is not being paid for fear. Winning is living without having to sell your nervous system at all. In the following months, the paper crane network matured into something that looked, from the outside, like mundane bureaucracy. Intake forms, triage calls, secure uploads, and checklists. Inside, it felt like a hidden transit system for people leaving danger. Nia insisted every case begin with consent and end with agency. No one was allowed to pressure a worker into going public. Public exposure was a tool, not a virtue. Some people needed quiet exits more than they needed vindication. Suri trained volunteers in metadata hygiene. She taught them how to strip identifying information from screenshots without destroying timestamp integrity, how to export logs in formats courts accept, how to verify a signature without handing the verifier a trail back to the victim. She made the trainings free and brutally practical. When someone asked whether all this paranoia was necessary, Suri replied, "It's not paranoia if the threat has a payroll department." Nia's own workplace instincts took longer to recalibrate. She still flinched when a man raised his voice on a conference call, even when the man was a regulator on her side. She still apologized automatically when someone cut her off. Arden noticed and began interrupting her apologies with a gentle phrase, "You don't owe that." It was not magic. It was repetition, a counter-habit to the old one. Sometimes it annoyed her. Sometimes it made her cry. Healing, she learned, is boring in the same way building a bridge is boring. You place beams, you test weight, you place more beams. Orchid Metrics tried to return to polite society by donating to charities and sponsoring civic tech competitions. They wanted to be forgiven through branding. Nia watched those sponsorships spread and felt anger flare. Kellen asked if she wanted to target them again. Nia said no, not because they didn't deserve pain, but because chasing them would make them the center of the story. "I'm done letting them be the sun," she said. Instead, she pushed the coalition to strengthen procurement rules city by city, so no rebranded vendor could sneak in under a different logo. She learned to aim at the infrastructure, not at the villain. Infrastructure is where power lives. A year after the hearings, a court issued the first major ruling citing the protocol as an unlawful extraction system. The opinion used sterile legal language, unauthorized transfers, deceptive practices, coercive design, but the effect was emotional. It gave workers a precedent that didn't depend on sympathy. Lawyers could now argue with citations, not pleas. Nia printed the ruling and pinned it beside the original spreadsheet where she had logged her first payout. She wanted the arc visible, from private fear to public standard. The ruling also sparked a backlash from vendors who made money selling emotional compliance. They funded think pieces about personal responsibility and resilience training, as if workers were the ones who needed adjustment. A pundit wrote that Nia was incentivizing victimhood. Nia replied in a public letter with 3 sentences. Victimhood is not incentivized by money. It is incentivized by impunity. Remove impunity, and you remove the market. The letter wasn't poetic. It was clear. Clarity traveled. Arden's relationship with Nia settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. They cooked cheap meals. They argued about whether to adopt a cat. Arden hated the idea of a living creature depending on him. Nia said, "So did I, until I realized dependence is not weakness when it's mutual." They adopted an old shelter cat that acted like it had seen too much. The cat slept on Nia's lap during late-night case reviews and bit Arden when he typed too loudly. Arden called it editorial discipline. Nia laughed until her stomach hurt. When new cases came in, Nia refused to become the kind of leader who burns out and calls it sacrifice. She instituted rotations, mandatory days off, and a rule that no one handled more than a certain number of active retaliations at once. The rule frustrated volunteers who wanted to be heroic. Nia told them heroism is the fastest route to collapse, and collapse is what abusers count on. Sustainable work is the cruelest thing you can do to a predatory system, because it denies the system the satisfaction of watching you break. The paper crane icon became known in some circles as a warning sign. Executives began removing it from vendor materials, switching to different watermarks, hiding in new patterns. That change was also proof of impact. Predators don't change behavior because they feel bad. They change because someone is watching. Nia didn't need them to repent. She needed them to lose efficiency. 2 years in, Suri discovered something that made her sit down hard. A cluster of transfers routed through a healthcare scheduling platform used in clinics serving low-income neighborhoods. The protocol was being used to pressure nurses into taking extra shifts, to punish those who questioned unsafe staffing, to reward those who swallowed harassment from patients and supervisors. Nia read the report and felt her pulse spike the way it used to in Orchid's glass rooms. This was exactly what the protocol had been designed to protect against before it was hijacked. It was the original sin repeating. They moved fast but not reckless. Arden contacted clinic whistleblowers through trusted intermediaries. Kellen secured meetings with the health department under confidentiality. Suri prepared a forensic extraction tool that could run on an air-gapped laptop in a supply closet. Nia trained the whistleblowers on what to document and what not to. No grand confrontations, no heroic speeches, no sudden resignations that would trigger immediate retaliation. Let them keep thinking you're weak, she told one nurse over a secure call. Weak is what keeps you alive long enough to build the case. The case broke quietly at first, then loudly when the health department confirmed unauthorized behavioral extraction in public clinics. The vendor tried to claim it was a wellness incentive. A nurse stood at a press conference and said, "Wellness doesn't pay you to accept abuse." The sentence traveled through social media like fire through dry grass. Watching that nurse, Nia felt a strange circle close. In Orchid metrics, Nia had performed weakness to survive. Now she was teaching others how to survive without being consumed by performance. The system had broken once because she had turned fear into data. It would keep breaking. She realized, because fear was no longer invisible. On the anniversary of her first payout, Nia opened the payroll app where it had begun. The paper crane icon was gone now, scrubbed by updates and lawsuits, but she could still feel its ghost like a watermark under skin. She closed the app, deleted it, and didn't feel panic. She felt relief. Then she opened a different dashboard, one owned by the Public Coalition, and reviewed the day's registry entries. Resolved cases, pending audits, new reports. The numbers were not exciting. They were steady. Steady was victory. Late that night, Arden found her at the kitchen table staring at a list of names. People who had sent the first messages. People who had risked jobs. People who had kept receipts. Arden asked if she was mourning. Nia nodded. "I'm mourning the years it took for anyone to believe us," she said. Arden poured her coffee and said, "And I'm grateful you didn't wait for belief." Nia looked at him and realized belief had never been the point. The point had been making harm legible enough that belief became irrelevant. The next morning, Crane. South sent another update. A supervisor had asked for the new wearable devices to be mandatory. The worker wrote, "I feel sick." Nia replied with the same steps she always used now. "Breathe, document, don't confront, preserve the logs, we will build the exit." She hit send, then stood up and went to the window. The harbor was bright. Boats moved like punctuation. For the first time in a long while, her body did not feel like a resource someone else could rent. It felt like her own. In the third year, several cities adopted the registry model as law. Vendors complained about cost. Cities replied with a simple procurement line. If your product can't withstand an audit, it can't be trusted with people's lives. The line wasn't revolutionary. It was responsible. Nia sat in a council chamber and listened to a policymaker read the clause aloud, and she felt something loosen behind her ribs. The clause meant that a future Nia would not have to become an expert coward just to pay rent. Orchid Metrics eventually dissolved into a merger and a rename, the corporate equivalent of washing hands. Nia stopped tracking the name. She tracked the pattern. Patterns, unlike companies, don't hide behind branding. When a new vendor appeared with a different icon but the same extraction signature family, Suri flagged it in minutes. When a manager tried to write tone compliance into a performance review system, a union rep recognized the phrasing and challenged it. The city learned to read the tells. That learning was the real deterrent. One day, Nia found herself in a small office helping a young analyst draft a resignation letter. The analyst kept writing apologies. Nia gently crossed them out. "You can leave without begging," she said. The analyst whispered, "But what if they call me difficult?" Nia smiled, not kindly but truthfully. "Let them. Difficult is often just what they call people who refuse to be harvested." The analyst laughed through tears. Nia realized then that her story had finally changed categories, from survival tale to tool. That evening, she went home, fed the cat, and folded a paper crane from a grocery receipt. She placed it on the windowsill where the light touched it. Arden asked what it meant. Nia said. It means I remember what they tried to buy. Arden nodded. Nia watched the crane's shadow stretch across the sill and felt, for once, completely unafraid of being underestimated. Underestimation no longer owned her. She owned it, and she used it like a key.